Hi everyone, welcome back to The Wandering Screen in partnership with Awards Focus. I'm Matt Koss and today we're diving back into the land of Oz. I'm joined by Oscar-nominated editor Myron Kerstein, who earned an Academy Award nomination for Wicked Part 1. His storytelling rhythm and emotional precision have become part of what defines modern movie musicals. He has edited also Tick Tick Boom. In our conversation, we talk about returning to Oz for the sequel, using audience reactions to refine the edit, and how Myron and director Jon M shaped the sequence for Good into both a visual spectacle and an emotional payoff. We also get into the craft, pacing, VFX, and how musical numbers like For Good were built from the ground up to land just right. So whether you're a fan of film editing, a lover of musicals, or just trying to understand how something this massive comes together, you're in for a real treat. Enjoy. Myron, it's really great to talk to you today. And I was really sorry to hear about you losing your home earlier this year in the fires. How are you doing now?
Well, yeah, it's a little bit of a strange sort of place because the house did not burn down, but it's surrounded by the houses that did, and so
Hmm.
we're still not back in there. So almost a year later, and it's the Christmas tree still stands, and it's like it's really like a time capsule of a year ago, and it's bittersweet as well because I actually edited some of the film from from my home remote location, and so doing the first assembly of For Good in that house, which was really emotional at the time. It has even more resonance.
Yeah, I mean, given that you were also uh, Oscar nominated last year at around the same time that the fires happened, it sounds like it would have been such a whirlwind, at the top of this year. How is it getting swept back into the Wicked craze again after last year's huge run?
This year has been like no other. I mean, I was literally sitting at some random person's friend of a friend's place watching the Oscar nominations happen,
Hmm.
and being, having no my clothes not, in boxes, my kids, clothes, smoke damaged, and I'm supposed to celebrate this thing, and then at the same time I was being asked to um, forget about everything that was happening and also cut a second movie.
Hmm.
And so in some ways, it's just a big relief to finally finish this film. And then of course to you take so much ownership as an editor when you're cutting any movie, but especially something of this scale. Both of the movies were just a monumental task between all the different departments, my post department, my music department, my VFX department, under myself and Jon's leadership. And so it feels like this big relief, but also it was such a time capsule of my life, 3 years between these two movies. And so saying goodbye it leaves a bit of a hole in my heart, but it's also Ari has spoken to this about herself, but it does feel healing as well. And I, of course, I loved, it's like Beatlemania with Wicked. It's the reception of it is, the fan, it just means so much to the fans. This story, and so to now bring it out into the world, it's a hole in my heart, but there's also a healing nature to it. So I'm just very relieved. I can't wait for the world. You nurture these babies with your director, and then you have to send them out to college, and then now it's the world's.
Yeah, and what was the timeline? Because if I understand that shooting was finished in around July last year. So how long was the editing for both films and then For Good separately?
Yeah, it was an 8-month shoot, and then another year and change to finish the first movie. But John wanted an assembly of both movies. He wanted to watch both films immediately after the shoot. So myself and my friend and colleague Tatiana Regal, we worked around the clock. That way, he had two films to watch. I think it was. August 15th, my birthday, a few years ago, we watched both films, and yeah, it was an incredible experience, Um, and then we put that first film, sorry, the second film asleep, because we didn't have the resources, we didn't have the bandwidth. We wanted to focus on the first film
Mm.
for that next, year. And then once we finished the first film, we were so exhausted. Everybody was, had given everything they had to finish that first film. And then, we just had to sort of, pull our, big boy pants and get back to it, and then of course, you unearth that second film, and you were like, okay, this isn't exactly what I remembered, what this assembly was like.
Mm.
We have a lot of work to do. And so it was just a matter of like getting back into it, trying a lot of ideas. We screened it for the studio pretty early on in the process as well, both movies. And so just having the faith that we could rely on the process of then moving through the next year. But it
Mm.
was a definite race. We were cutting this thing up till September and color correcting up to October.
My
So, it was definitely, we were tinkering and trying a lot of ideas. We were moving things like Girl in the Bubble.
mm.
But, we were restructuring those like really big moves pretty late in the process. So, um, thankfully we were such a well-oiled machine after the first movie, and everyone was still on it. So to move into post, you can I can go to my music department, Jack Dolman and Catherine Wilson, and say, um, look, I know that we're all tired, but can we try to work on the first act together and just try like 20 different ideas and rip this thing apart? And they can do that without, getting to know each other, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, this obviously is not your first musical. Like you started with Camp and then Fame and then editing Tick Tick Boom and In the Heights. But this is the first musical where it has a year-long intermission between both parts of the film. How did that inform the way that you and Jon and the rest of the team were approaching the edit and bringing audiences back into the story?
Yeah, it was very unique. I had never done anything like having a big intermission between two movies. I just had movies I loved as a resource, like Empire Strikes Back going into Return of the Jedi, or the Harry Potter films. Other films that, Back to the Future, of course. I just had other films that I remember how they had affected me and how excited I was to get back into it, but also knowing that we needed certain information to draw the audience back in. But we again, there was a lot of experimentation. There was a lot of um head scratching as far as even the first act of For Good, because we didn't know if we needed a recap. We didn't know if we needed voiceover, a scroll like you would do in Star Wars. We used to have the scene where the Munchkins are building bricks of the Yellow Brick Road, and then we drop in. It was kind of a bit of a misdirect
Mm.
of some delight until but there was a lot more of flashbacks in the beginning of the film. I even tried more flashbacks. I tried a flashback where Alphabet literally jumps out of the building. That's the opening of the movie, and then you're dropping into and having a sort of a recap of Defying Gravity. We just trying a lot of different things as far as like what did the audience need, what was their expectation, how many years have passed. We ended up finally landing on this horrible narration voiceover announcement propaganda, because we just knew they needed enough information. But then to just drop right in on the backs of, the Yellow Brick Roads being built on the backs of the animals, and that Elphaba is going to show up like the superhero that we saw when we left the first movie. And
Mm.
then we can introduce Glinda and the delight and the propaganda and the sort of intercutting, introducing Fiero, like all that was just unlike not unlike the first movie, just a lot of experimentation to make that sort of opening work. And then how do we sort of build into Glinda's storyline? That took a lot of experimentation. We used to have Bach and Nessa scenes really early up
Mm.
right after the opening. We're like, oh, that might be just a little too much melodrama up front. Maybe we should stick to the characters we love and know, and make sure that we're grounded in their storylines first. And then we ended up shooting another scene with a young Glinda arc, a scene that was scripted but then was cut out when they shot. And then we're like, no, 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 we actually need that scene. Let's go back and get it. And a lot of experimentation with tone, as far as how much comedy can we have at the beginning, how much dancing can we have at the beginning. It was just an accordion and a lot of experimentation to make sure that when you drop back in, that you're just immersed into that world right away, and then we could start slowly getting into the meat of this. All of this, by the way, we have no idea what the audience expects, only from the original stage show do we sort of have an idea, but this was sort of untested waters in a lot of way.
Yeah, I mean, the audiences for this film are vastly different because you've got the fans of the musical, you've got the fans of the book as well. And then there's someone like me who has neither read nor seen the musical, but really enjoyed the film as a film lover. And then coming into the second film, there's such a tonal shift coming into it from the first film where I really appreciated the trust that you had in the audience to dive back into the world after the year of waiting for part two. But that tonal shift is very large, especially in that first sequence on the yellow brick road, because it's like an action sequence, and the camera is always moving. There's not like a. It's very rare that I found that there was a static shot of just the camera just sitting and looking at someone until we get to the end. How is that with editing, especially with what you're explaining about the tonal shift and coming into the story and the different avenues that you were trying? How did the camera movements also play a part in how you were editing the first sequence?
Yeah, I mean, John and I wanted to treat this like Batman, and that we wanted to hide Elphaba into that moment where she lands on the yellow brick road, and that's the big reveal, and hopefully there's a big applause there, But just being a little bit more like we said that this is like our adventure moment, and we wanted to engage the audience right away, and I think that John and I use a lot of tricks up of our sleeves in the films that we work on together, that we give some delight and comedy, and then we could sort of slip into the melodrama and the more stillness and the more quiet scenes, but to sort of enter this thing with a bang and use the sort of Alice's incredible camera work, to move through this scene and make it feel very exciting and uh yeah, just this adventure quality to it. I think that was our main goal. At the end of the day, we're just trying to engage the audience, and for me, like, when there's a lot of movement, I have to be careful not to get too crazy and to get lost. And then we add shots. We added this moment where Elphaba is flying and we're on her back, and then she grabs the hair, and it's supposed to mimic the moment in the first movie where she grabs her hair and reveals the color of her skin. And we wanted to build in this moment when she flies off, similar to how she flew off at the end of part one, and then we cut to the tulip shots of the guard running and then the big title, so we're adding all these dynamic shots as well in post. And so sometimes it's hard because just because you could do something doesn't mean you should. And so we're using some restraint as well as embracing some of this sort of camera work. I would say that most of the time with the camera work, we were trying to hide Elphaba in some ways and then build to this big reveal. But at the end of the day, it's about engagement with the audience for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you've got such powerhouse performances, as with the first film as well. How did you go about, especially with the new songs that are incorporated in this film, how did you go about balancing the incredible performances that you're getting from Ariana Grande and from Cynthia Erivo, and making sure that the film is still moving, but also not feeling like a music video?
Well, the best thing about working with Cynthia and Ari is that they're so in the scene. You know, there's no difference between them singing a song and them acting in any other scene. And the way Simon Hayes records the audio, you know, it's very fluid from a dialogue in For Good into the singing in For Good. And for me, I don't treat it any differently. I just treat it as if they're all one scene. Just because they're singing something doesn't mean I treat it like dialogue. And that the scene is about, For Good is about a scene where they're saying goodbye to each other and trying to tell each other how each of them has affected their lives, and that they're no longer going to be together, and they're realizing that, and you're touched by that because just in the last film they were just meeting for the first time. And so I just have to really trust in the performance and how it affects me, and whether it makes me cry or whether it gives me goosebumps or whether I laugh at it. Like those, I just have to remember those moments and really try to craft what, I end up getting an avalanche of footage, and it was 250 hours between the two movies. So I just have to mine all this gold, and then trust the performance and trust, what was happening on the day. You mentioned tone before, to be shooting Popular one day and the next day shooting For Good, you could see the range of these actors, what they're bringing. And of course they look so different. Like they look older, the tone is so much darker, so much where I'd have to call Jon and have a conversation and say, this is a completely different movie, right? And it was just like, yeah, that's the point. And I have to trust what the actors are bringing, and then honor that performance, and then just be really careful about how I craft it, because they're bringing everything, right? And so they're trusting me to find it. No one's telling me where the out of the 250 hours of footage, what the best performances in the Ozdesk Ballroom is, or where the best performances in For Good, or in the new songs. Like, I don't even have the original source material to give me guidance. I just have to trust how I'm reacting and how I'm embracing that footage. And of course, when I then approach Jon, I say, does this feel right to you? And the good thing with Jon and I is we're often on the same page. We have the same taste. We've from Crazy Rich Asians to In the Heights to now, we've built this sort of shorthand as far as like how we work together and how much he gives me ownership to the process. So, but yeah, I just have to really listen to my actors, and thank goodness it's the two of the best on the planet, not only, acting, but also singing.
Were you able, when the first film came out, to sit in public screenings and get a sense of what the audiences were reacting to? And did that inform some of the choices that you were making For Good?
Yes, I mean, I love going to the cinema and sitting in the theater, and I would sit in sold out theaters, just once the run had gone on a little bit, like just a few people in the theater. I've been in, of course, our previews, when we're testing the film, the premieres. Yeah, it's I guess in a lot of ways it just validated how I, like, when I was cutting the Ozdesk Ballroom, I was crying every day when I was watching the dailies. Like they shot like hours of footage of just that one scene, and I was crying from start to finish, every single take. And so I just then had to figure out like how to harness the best parts of that, of the gold again that they're giving me. And so when I'm constructing a scene and that it works emotionally and I'm crying at the end, it just validates, when you see with the audience and they're crying too, because you're like, there's something there. And I don't think it's just because I'm a sentimental sap. Like I think I'm really connecting to this emotionally. And so it just validates how I feel. I think sometimes I don't always realize how much these characters mean to somebody. So then when I see that, I'm reminded of that, it goes deeper for a fan base, and then I'm making new fans too with these characters. And so anyways, I just think that when you watch something and then you please them, and of course they laugh, and and they cry, and and they're they walk away from the first film thinking, oh my god, I can't wait for the second movie. I don't know what happens next. That's really exciting to me. um Sometimes that can also be a detriment, because in the second movie, I wanted to please people so much. I wanted to make them laugh. I wanted to give them delight. And a lot of that is not in the second movie. A lot of it is about the consequences. It's about the melodrama. It's, as Jon would say, the meat. And
Mm,
so, um, there were sometimes jokes I had to cut out of the second movie. There were even in the original stage play that Jon, myself, and Mark felt like was inappropriate. And that's really, really hard to make those choices, because that the audience is going to laugh.
mm.
Like, because you are laughing, but you're like, this is inappropriate to the scene, or we are getting in the way of a bigger idea if we go for the easy joke, the layup. And that is totally counterproductive, especially when I've cut comedy like Crazy Rich Asians. It's like every joke sort of rules sometimes, especially the A ones, and so um but at the end of the day, I think it is a very validating experience watching with the audience. And then, of course, you learn about, like, okay, on this film, we're going to actually do the opposite. We're going to actually keep these two characters apart for as long as possible.
Mm.
In the first movie, we're trying to keep them together. Like, here, we're going to actually manipulate the audience to make them feel frustrated that they're the two characters we wanted to see the most together can never be together.
Mm.
And so, in a lot of ways, we learn from that in a sort of lopsided way. Like, okay, we can't make them laugh this time. We can't give them this, but what we can give them is a deeper, more emotional take on it.
Yeah, I mean, there were various parts that I was like, I can't wait for them to be back in the same room together, because they're so electric when they get into the scene together. Um, and I've watched a few really hard dramas this award season already, and sometimes the audience just bursts out laughing, and you can never anticipate how someone's going to react to what they're seeing, even in
Mm.
something that's very emotional, because we have such strong reactions to things that people wouldn't expect. But I was reading about your interview with Variety as well, the Artisans interview, and talking about the different ways that you were editing No Good Deed. That there was another sequence, there was another version of it that was more of an action sequence. How did you land on that for this new film in the way that audiences are seeing it next week?
Well, it's still pretty incredibly epic. No Good Deed.
Yeah, it is.
I think it's like everything else. There's a level of restraint that when you revisit the dailies, and you see the intensity on Cynthia's face, and how she's just belting out these vocals. Sometimes you just want to be in there with her and feel the messiness and the wind blowing on her face, and you just want to be in there. And sometimes, it's not always about the epic crane shot and being, and sometimes I want to flourish as an editor, and I want to, treat everything like, what is this feeling where, it's like split screens and fast cutting. And sometimes you just, again, restraining yourself, and allowing the sort of the performance to guide you, and to feel Cynthia's pain and struggle in this moment, and then let this incredible vendor like ILM to deliver the sort of epicness of it, and not get in the way of that. And so, Jon and I, sometimes we just end up tearing things apart after they're working really well, and refining in a way that just supports the more messiness of certain takes.
Mm.
Um, and hopefully, and just man, let Cynthia sort of bring it, and then you could suggest an epic shot like the last shot where we're pulling back from that, like, and that sort of mimics the last shot of Defying Gravity. You can bring that sort of epicness in there, but for me, the messiness and the quiet moments. I love that moment in No Good Deed as well, where she's thinking about Nessa and Dr. Dilliman, and and then bringing to Fierro, the quiet moments within something that's very like loud and bombastic and epic. I think that's a bit of a another tool in our toolbox that we have, that we use in Defying Gravity, where we could shut down the scene and have again some restraint, and then sort of build up into these climaxes.
Yeah, every time I hear Nessa Rose, I'm like, "Oh, Nessa Rose, evil." But
Mm.
that scene as well with Bach and, Elphaba is really interesting because, there's a lot of story elements that aren't exposed in the first film that come out in this film in terms of, our relationship with the Wizard of Oz. And how did that factor into the transformations of some of the characters into becoming the new Wizard of Oz familiar characters, especially with Bach, because it's a very quick sequence, but we get a sense of what he's become.
It's really interesting, even if you talk about both films, that, there's a certain, well, when you watch a stage play, it's like on warp speed, right? You're moving through these plot lines, and we do have a lot more real estate because we have two movies to move through these plot lines and the character building and the world building. But in some ways, it's also still very quick, so we have to use these scenes very strategically to build as much information and to create the set piece. And so that scene with Bach, Nessa, and Elphaba was one of the hardest scenes to get to crack, because there is so much information. They're singing there. There's conflict that we have to build in, and we have to make sure that people don't get lost. We have to have the magic moment where Elphaba, conjures a spell to make Nessa fly. There's a lot of melodrama again built into the scene, and a lot of it's built with looks and stretching out performance, and then building into this transformation moment, which is arguably, it's like now we're into a monster movie in some ways. And so, which by the way, I just love as a delightful thing as an editor, because I loved, those Universal monster movies growing up. And so to have this, to build into this classic moment, and to see very little of the transformation, to do it in a, really restrained way. We had all the footage in the world, by the way, to show the transformation, like, a version of like American Werewolf in London or something. We could have gone down the route, but again, this sort of restraint and then building up to the reveal of the Tin Man, and building into this moment and the horror of it, of what Nessa and Elphaba have done to him. And to just feel, he's, Bach is soon becoming full incel. He's going to be, it's soon enough, he's going to be trying to kill Elphaba. And so you have to feel the weight of that in short order. And so, you start a scene that's, innocuous enough where, Bach is just, really pissed at Nessa for entrapping him, and just wants to get away from her at this point. And, um, and then by the end of it, he's turned into this, into the Tin Man, that is just such a fast arc to pull off.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it gets really intense. I really love like the last half hour, and especially with the VFX of the tornadoes coming in, the storm coming, and it really transforms the movie into something like it. To me, it's soared, and then we get to the song for good with Elphaba and Linda, and it really slows things down. It's like a decrescendo. Can you talk a bit about how that moment came together, and using both, as you were talking about before, the singing dialogue against the reaction shots as well of the characters?
I could talk to you all day, man. Seriously. No, seriously, it's really great questions. I really appreciate it. I I have to say that For Good in some ways always worked out of context. Um, but to have Girl in the Bubble come before it, and then this sort of reprise of March of the Witch Hunters, and then the abduction of Dorothy, which feels really sort of bombastic, and I think it's really delightful to see that moment. And that was a moment that I had pitched Jon to actually see that abduction, and pitched the shot of the legs, because I thought that we just needed a little bit more meat and Wizard of Oz timeline before we got into For Good. And I think if you give moments of like Girl in the Bubble, which is really slow and lyrical and beautiful, and then you give a moment of sort of I would say like a spark and action, and then again it gives you an opportunity to slow down, but you have to sort of tap the brakes a little bit. You can't just sort of you can't just pull the emergency brake and then get into a song like that. So you're slowly drawing out looks and silence between lines over the course of For Good, in order to get to the song to work well, and that it doesn't feel like inorganic. And so you can notice that the rhythms of the scene slow down over more and more and more. And then after they sing this incredible song together, then holding on the emotion of them not wanting to say goodbye to each other, and then going to the closet. And the closet is actually very quick. It's almost fleeting. And so it's almost the opposite, where they have to say goodbye. And before you know it, the door closes, and we have that incredible in-camera split screen, which is, to me, a paying to homage to like, what is this feeling? But they're on the opposite side of each other, and they're just holding on to their grief and their pain and their love for each other. And so it's an interesting sort of arc with the rhythms of that piece, where you're slowly building into these really emotional quiet moments, and then having these fleeting moments, and then building to the lyrical moments of like of Dorothy melting Elphaba, and using that very sort of grand and operatic in a way, and being really restrained about what you see. And so I see it as all one piece, really, where we're using a lot of tools in our toolbox to manipulate the audience and to build into this sort of operatic and grandness, and then and hopefully carry that emotion all the way to the end of the film. And so which is really difficult when you're like, okay, the movie ends it For Good. Like, how do I keep feeling all the way to the end? And so that is that's how we tried to do our best to manipulate the audience and get them in there.
I mean, it's beautiful, it's moving, it's like event cinema in the best possible way. And I am so excited for it to come out next week and for people to start being able to enjoy it, because it's really wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I cannot wait for everyone to experience it. I feel like it's a film like no other. To me, it really conjures up, the golden age of cinema, and how I felt when I watched films as a kid. And I'm really looking forward to them. All the think pieces, all the the memes, all the everything that people have, the good and the bad, by the way. So it's like I'm all I love everyone. The thing that I love about cinema is everyone has an opinion too, and so it's like, bring it. That's what it's there for, is for art to have a discussion, and I couldn't be happier.
If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to check out awardsfocus.com for more of our award season coverage, and of course, subscribe here on the Wandering Screen for more interviews with the creatives bringing your favorite stories to life. I'm Matt Koss. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.